Brian McNoldy, thanks so much for chatting with me today. We're going to kind of summarize what went on here this past season. I think if we learned anything this season is that you cannot summarize the season in quiet or non-quiet, right? This was interesting for sure. Some ups and downs, but let's go through some of these points. I was reading your blog and I want to hear about some of these points that you made. One of them, kind of a super science nerdy one, the ACE. Tell me about the ACE for the season and what that accumulated cyclone energy means and how it compares to previous years.
Yeah, certainly. It's a metric that we use that does not consider the number of storms. Like we often count storms too, like how many named storms were there, how many hurricanes were there. So ACE does not do that. It integrates the intensity and duration of whatever storms there were. So one long-lived strong hurricane will accrue way more ACE than most of the other storms combined. So it's a way of measuring the activity of a season, not by the number of storms that happen, but by their intensity and longevity.
Makes sense. Okay. And then how did we do this season compared to past?
It was slightly above average. We ended up at 108% of the average. So not too far above average, but still an above average season.
Something that was noteworthy for sure. Landfalls. We didn't have any here in the US, right?
We did not. And that is uncommon. The last time we made it through a hurricane season without a hurricane landfall in the US was 2015. And of course, we've had lots since then, some years with 4 or 5 of them. The only one that was a close call, and we almost had one, was Hurricane Imelda. And that's a whole other subtopic here, but Hurricane Humberto came to the rescue and yanked it away from the US coast.
Right. And then suddenly this term, commonly known to meteorologists, Fujiwara, became a household name.
Yes.
What about that's direct landfalls, but there were certainly impactful systems this year, right? When it came to like beach erosion and just East Coast impacts.
Yeah. Most of the hurricanes followed approximately the same track this season. They came through the deep tropics, they turned north, well east of the US East Coast. But even though the US East Coast avoided a direct landfall, hurricanes spread their influence over very, very long distances when it comes to ocean swells and waves and influence on the tide levels. So yeah, even a hurricane 1,000 miles away can produce coastal erosion and flooding problems.
Yeah. Something else that stood out I saw in your blog was how long it took for us to get that first named storm of the season.
Yeah, it was. I have to refresh my memory here. So yeah, the first one was Andrea, and yeah, that was June 24th. So a bit later than the median date, which is June 15th. So that doesn't sound too crazy, but it was actually the latest first named storm date since 2014. So again, it was the first year since 2015 that we went without U.S. hurricane landfalls, and we had the latest first named storm since 2014.
So the past 10 years have been certainly, I
Yeah.
guess we could call active. What about the peak of the season, the time of year where we start to get more activity? Things were suspiciously quiet. What caused that?
Yeah, and first I'll mention that once again, the peak of the season was suspiciously quiet. We saw the same thing in 2024,
That's
and
right.
we look back at that. It wasn't dead quiet like this one was, but it was almost dead quiet in 2024. And it had those same questions of like, okay, well, this is strange that here we are in the peak of the season and crickets. Last year, just to give some context, the reason ended up being the waves came off of Africa pretty far north, way further north than normal. So they encountered cooler ocean temperatures. They were much more prone to turn north more quickly rather than being able to track to the deep tropics. So the waves were still coming off of Africa in 2024 during the peak of the season, but they were coming off at the wrong place. So it kind of short circuited that whole mode of hurricane formation. This year, we also had waves coming off of Africa during the peak of the season, but they encountered fairly dry air and a bit higher than average wind shear over much of the Atlantic. So, for not the same reason, but it was timed the same, that we just had the waves that came off of the African coast were not able to become hurricanes during the peak of the season. They did during other parts of the season, but not, this was basically late August into the third week of September was dead quiet.
Yeah. I've talked to you before about names and like any patterns when it comes to names. I don't know. In my just anecdotally, I think like, oh, there used to be a lot of I names that were impactful. And now I'm feeling like N is having like a moment. Is there something climatologically there, or is that just like what I'm
It's just
remembering?
luck. But yeah, there certainly have been some infamous M name storms. So, when you look out at the course of the alphabet and which letters have had the most retired names, M kind of sticks out like a sore thumb toward that end part of the alphabet. It's definitely not toward the more active part of the season typically. So yeah, it's just luck because you could easily have just one random name storm make that miss, and instead of this name this year, the most impactful storm this year being an M storm, it could have just as easily been an N storm.
Mhm.
It just wasn't.
Right, right, right. Do they, and I know that this is not like your decision retiring names, but do they ever retire names that didn't make landfall? Like I'm thinking of Aaron and just like how big and strong it was, and Cat 5. Would they ever retire a name that did not like kill people, I guess?
The retirement is based on impacts. So it doesn't necessarily have to make landfall. You could have a tropical cyclone, which includes even tropical storms. They can be retired if they pass near somewhere and dump a ridiculous amount of rain and cause death and destruction. So sometimes you can have a tropical storm name get retired, but a strong storm like Aaron that was kind of not very impactful really for anybody. Not going to be retired.
But obviously, I think we can assume Melissa will be. And then news coming out about this record-breaking wind measurement out of the drop zone.
Yeah,
That's pretty wild, right?
it is. It did set a new record for strongest wind measured by a dropsonde. It's important to point out that that is not the intensity of the storm, though. So, and I've already seen that out there. The hurricane was that strong. What the dropsondes are is they're instruments that are released from the plane, and they fall down through the atmosphere and splash into the ocean. And on their way down, they're recording temperature and moisture and wind and all those good things. And I forget what altitude this measurement was at, but it was certainly not at the ground level. And it was also an instantaneous wind. So there's two important reasons this is not the intensity of the storm. The way we measure and assign intensity of a hurricane, and then that feeds into was it a category 3 or 4 or 5, is it needs to be a 1 minute sustained wind at a 10-meter altitude above the ground, so about 33 feet. That is what the intensity of a hurricane is based on, not a gust at the surface, and certainly not a gust well above the surface where this was measured. But it's still impressive. It's just not the intensity of the hurricane.
Right. Also impressive, which I saw in your blog post, the success of Google DeepMind's model on this season. Can you talk about that?
This is really kind of an eye opener, I think, for a lot of people. The Google DeepMind model was run in real time and available for all to see since June. That's a pretty brave step, really, to put a new model out there that's not run by the government, but just a private company with a model and run in real time for all to see and critique. And I think early on, a lot of people started to get the sense that it was doing well. Like So it did catch eyes early on of like, okay, well, maybe we should not ignore this, even though it's the new kid on the block. So it definitely caught people's attention early on. And then as the season was wrapping up, I decided to run the verification code that I have. And what that does is it just takes the observed storm track and intensity, and you compare that to any other forecast. It could be the National Hurricane Center's forecast. It could be the GFS model. It could be the Google DeepMind model. I think in the plot that I shared in my blog post, I have 11 models on there or something, or maybe 10 plus the National Hurricane Center. And for track, the Google DeepMind model was either the best, or I think at a 5-day lead time, it tied with the National Hurricane Center. Let me take a glance at it and refresh myself. Yeah. So for track, it beat every conventional model, and for most of the lead times beat the National Hurricane Center. That's remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
Almost always the National Hurricane Center comes in first place because they have the intuition and the skill to filter through all the models, and their forecast almost always beats any individual model. It's really pretty impressive. So this is noteworthy that this new model outperformed the National Hurricane Center at every lead time except for at 5 days where it was a tie. And then for intensity, it was more or less a tie throughout the lead times. Again, maybe the 5-day point might be a little bit of a spread there where the National Hurricane Center outperformed Google DeepMind. But for a new model to be leading the pack easily for track and intensity is just really, really amazing. And it absolutely will get a lot of attention.
Of course, the model is not telling us, what the individual impacts might be for your location. So still definitely need that hurricane center.
Yes.
Brian, your blog is coming to an end. A 30-year reign is coming to an end. Tell me about this.
Well, I kind of made that a somewhat of an announcement at the start of this year's post. This past year was the 30th year, and I originally thought of making that the end of it because it's a nice round number. But then I didn't really feel that yet. I was like, I think I have another year in me. And then I also did want it to kind of coincide with the 100th anniversary of the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926, which is, as hurricanes go, if that were to happen in 2026, it would by far be the most impactful, most expensive hurricane ever. So it has a special place in hurricane history. So I kind of thought that might be a nice one to include. And so, yeah, to go another year. But I started that blog in 1996, which is just impossible to believe. I don't know where the years went.
Yeah.
It was before the term blog was even invented.
I was going to say, I wouldn't have had any idea how to find a blog in 1996.
No, it was a very different information landscape out there, really, in the mid 90s. And it actually served perhaps more of a purpose then than it does now. Like I did the legwork of grabbing all the information and putting it into an easy to digest, just short summary of what's going on in the Atlantic right now. And in the mid 90s, that was not something that was easily accessible for most people to just know where to find all these bits and pieces. And the amount of information and the type of information that was around 30 years ago, it just wasn't what it is now.
Yeah. Well, Brian, best of luck to you, whatever comes after 2026 as far as sharing information. But we appreciate your 30 years of blogging. Is there anything else you want to share about the 2025 season?
Well, yeah, I think it is worth looking a little closer because we had that really fascinating Fujiwara interaction, which we mentioned at the start. And that's effectively what saved the U.S. from having its only hurricane landfall this year. Hurricane Imelda was almost certainly going to end up making landfall in South Carolina or North Carolina if Hurricane Humberto to its east hadn't been there. And they were just marginally close enough that we started to think, well, they could do something. And the days went on, and indeed they did. They started to approach each other. They started to rotate around a common center. And Hurricane Humberto was a much larger and more intense storm. So the influence on its track was pretty minor. And at the time, Tropical Depression 9 and then Tropical Storm in Melda, it was much more influenced by their closeness, and so its track got deflected off to the east, and that was that. We went from what could have been a pretty significant hurricane landfall in the Carolinas with a lot of rain where they really didn't need it after Hurricane Helene a year ago, and off it went. And so it was really a high profile Fujiwara interaction. We really don't get to see that too often.
Yeah. And I like that we were talking about it because it improved the trust in meteorologists too, because it wasn't just this storm that took a sharp turn away and everybody, was left wondering what was going on. Like the science was shared and
Yeah,
it was cool to see people take interest in that. And we were breathing a sigh of relief here in Charleston.
absolutely.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time today. This was great.
My pleasure. Anytime.